Patch 1207 is absolutely huge. It's called Revelations. It launches June 16th, 17th for EU, and there's a lot in it, far more than a 0.7 patch would usually have. So we're getting 2 new zones to quest in, there's some additions to 1205's content, there's Lorewalking campaigns, there's a new stage to the campaign, we get an expansion-wide power boost, and all of that is shipping alongside some of the largest experimental features that Blizzard have ever put into the live game. There is a lot to cover, so I'll get stuck in with the 2 new worlds. But before any of that, I've got a reminder that'll probably spook you. It always spooks me, and that's that Father's Day is almost here. And if your dad's a bit impossible to buy for, maybe the type who insists he wants nothing, maybe today's sponsor Novium has got the answer for you. This is the Hover Pen. And just look at it, it's floating. There's no batteries, there's no wires, it's all just magnets. How do they work? No one knows. Okay, loads of people know, but what's cool is it spins on its base at 23.5 degrees, which is the exact tilt of the Earth's axis. It sent me over one, and it's not left my desk since. It's gorgeous. I guess it's actually desk art that also happens to be a real refillable pen machined from aircraft-grade aluminium. It's one of those things you just don't see every day. It almost looks like a glitch in the Matrix, and, well, people have tended to notice and ask about it, which makes it a brilliant gift. Be it for your dad for Father's Day, or of course, just for yourself. But if you're gifting, it arrives in a beautiful box, ready to hand straight over. There's 4 colors, but if your dad's the real space and physicsy sort that I know a lot of you are, I certainly am, then the premium interstellar model sets a real fragment of a meteorite into the tip. Yeah, meteorite older than the Earth. So I guess it'll be the oldest thing that you or he will ever hold. And you don't even need to worry about going fountain or rollerball because the Hover Pen Future does just that, having swappable tips. So all you need to do is use code BellularWarcraft, which will get you 15% off any Hover Pen for the first 72 hours, and then 10% off after that. Free shipping to most countries. The code's on the screen, the link's in the description. And with that said, let's get into the video. Remember the Void Assaults from patch 1205? Well, those were led by Imperator Pertinax and the Halhadar Ethereals, and basically in 1207 we take the fight to them. And this is all via a new portal that's opened up in Voidstorm, where, depending on the week, it will drop you onto one of 2 new zones. The first one is Nagtal, maybe Nagtal, who knows, but it's a fungal, arcane-rich world that the Halhadar Ethereals are strip mining for power. The second one then is Val, which is a frozen, dead Legion world where Imperator Pertinax has managed to dig himself in. And if you played patch 7.3 of Legion, you'll probably recognize these as some of the Legion portal worlds. They are that, but this time around Blizzard has actually expanded each one of the zones, and they really don't feel the same at all. Now on them, you're going to find the usual suspects: rares, treasures, world quests, a world boss, some events. But unlike, say, the big flight-enabled zones of Midnight, you tackle these from the ground. Now, I know no flying is a big issue for some, but here I'll say that the compact size and the density of these zones means that it actually feels like it is designed for a ground mount, so it does feel pretty good. And for Nagtal especially, it just really works. I mean, as much as this Legion wreck does scream, hey, the art direction of The Force Awakens, you can't deny the view. It's pretty impressive. But if you ask me, with these zones, what really matters is the new heroic version. Basically, it's called Heroic World Tier, and it represents Blizzard's latest attempt at making WoW's open world, I guess, not feel hellishly dated. So whenever this is activated, mobs are vastly stronger, and I mean vastly. There's also affixes, and some of these are what you'd expect, right? Mushrooms to dodge, enemies that summon copies of themselves at 66 and 33% health. But it's not just that. There's actually ones that impact the whole map. A great example of that is bands of elites that basically roam the zone and hunt you down. It's pretty cool. The Halhadar send the elite warp riders out to ambush anyone who's moving around the swamp, and then we get some pretty cool rare elites like the Indomitable Mark 12, which is basically the Fel Reaver. Now, on Heroic, it really does get crazy. One of the affixes basically has you being marked for ambush outright, where ethereal assassins will just straight up try to take you out, and it'll target whenever you're already tangled up fighting other mobs. It's really quite crazy, And overall, I would say that Blizzard have really cooked on this one. It actually manages to feel like a truly hostile place that you're assaulting. Now, to give you an idea of the difficulty here, the normal recommended eye level is 217, but the heroic world tier is 274. And in our own testing, the heroic tier really does earn its name. It's a real step up over anything that you'll find in WoW's open world, and honestly, it's a real solid reason to push your gear as high as it'll go, which you'll very much be able to do. Now, I may hear you cry, but what about the loot? Well, yeah, what about the loot? Turns out there's a lot of it. So, on normal, the rares drop adventurer track gear and the world boss will drop champion gear. And yeah, each one has a world boss. But on heroic world tier, the rares drop champion gear and the world boss drops hero gear. So, that's a lot, but it's actually far from all, because you will get heaps of field accolades. That's the returning currency from patch 1205. Now, on normal, a rare gives you 30 of them, but on heroic, a rare will give you 60. Now, we can compare that to patch 1205's numbers, where you get 8 for a Void Strike and 150 for a maxed out tier 5 ritual site. So basically, whenever you go through these zones, you will be swimming in accolades, which are now actually even more useful. So the existing gacha box that costs 500 of them and gives you a random piece of hero gear, that's still there, but there's a new one that is per slot, so you can actually target what gear you get, and it costs 750 accolades. It is far, far better. But that's actually not all in terms of gear rewards, because the next thing is truly a first for WoW, and that is myth gear earned from the open world. So there's a new quest called Knocking Off the Top, and it requires you to collect 4 Void Commander's emblems from the 2 heroic world bosses. Those are Nexus Captain Lethir and Imperator Pertinax. Now, sadly, it'll take 4 weeks to get all of these, but in return, you'll be able to get a myth track back, wrist, or waist. So that's a pretty chunky power boost, but there's one more thing, and that is the weekly Fill the Bar quest. I know, we always get one, it would be easy to forget, but in this case, the heroic world tier version of it gives you 15 hero crests and 15 myth crests. So, quite a lot, but there are still loads of other rewards. As an example, the Netherforged Null Frame and the Voidmancer's Starcarver mounts, there's a new set of pets, a full set of Void Elf weapon and armor mogs, and for killing the heroic world bosses, you can get the Tortured Gorger, which almost sounds like a taunt or an insult at the player. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing coming in this patch, which itself is a fairly huge experiment. Sporefall is a new one-boss raid in Harrendar, but that's not why it's exciting to me. Now, it does have interesting things. It drops the absolute best gear in the game right now, but also it's a huge departure from the norm, and that's because for Sporefall, and only Sporefall, Mythic difficulty now scales anywhere from 15 to 25 players, which could be a pretty big deal for guilds like mine who happily clear Heroic ahead of the curve, but can't keep up with the recruitment requirements of a fixed Mythic roster. So if this works, it could end up being the new normal. Though even if it does work, I wouldn't expect Mythic Flex to be a thing for, say, patch 12.1's big new raid. Now, there's one other thing here, and that's the gear itself. The gear carries the Spore Fused tag, meaning that it drops 9 item levels higher than fully upgraded raid loot, which means eye level 259, 272, 285, and, for Mythic Flex, 298. So ridiculously strong gear, and on top of that you can snag yourself the Luminous Spore Gorger mount. So, this is already quite a lot for a 0.7 patch, but as it turns out, I am far from done, because this patch has got way more in it still. So with all this hard content, you probably want to get your character powerful, and you'll very much be able to do that. So there's 2 big things here. There's the Omnium Folio, and then for the first time ever, solo farmable myth crests. But I'll talk about the Folio first. So you help Magister Umbric and Grand Magister Ramath restore this old Sunstrider family relic, and when you do, it opens up a tree of runes that you build out week by week. Now I say tree, but it's really just 5 rows where you can pick 1 rune for each of those rows. But the runes themselves are pretty cool. One of them pulls in floating void orbs and just flings them whatever you're fighting. There's another that calls down a big pillar of fire that either burns an enemy or patches up an ally, somehow, and there's a bunch of other ones. But I think what's key is that compared to past systems like Circe Circlet or the Titan Belt, it does differ in some key ways. First thing is that it doesn't take up one of your gear slots. That'll be pretty big, especially as we move into the next season. And speaking of that, this is going to be active for the duration of the expansion, and then third, it's fully account-wide. And unlike having to fiddle around with the gems for your circlet, you can very easily swap out your active runes from anywhere outside of combat. So overall, I'd say it is one of those systems, but it does seem to be better than a lot of the other ones that Blizzard have done before. And then, once you finish off its questline, you'll get a decor version of it to put in your house. So, that's one big new power source, but the second one is actually something new that's happening to ritual sites, which were one of the features of patch 12.05. So what's coming in this patch is Tier 6 for ritual sites. Tier 6 activates once you've got 6 affixes active, and while it doesn't give you any better gear in the Great Vault, what it does do is it gives you myth crests. And that actually means that for the first time ever, you can solo farm myth crests. Now to tally up the numbers here, delves give you 20 a week, then the heroic world tier weekly will give you 15, and with this, you can just solo farm the rest of them. Though, as it turns out, there is an even harder version than Tier 6, which is basically just doing it with all 8 challenges active, and if you do that, you'll get the Ritual Breaker title. And as you do all of this stuff, you'll of course be earning all those currencies that were already introduced into the game with 12.05, and that does include Dark Particles. And you'll now be able to spend those Dark Particles on Amani, Naga, Blood Elf, and Twilight's Blade cosmetic weapon caches. That really was a mouthful, but basically, whenever you're doing the Void Assaults, you could get these little field pouches that would sometimes, kind of rarely, have cool bits of transmog in them. With this, you can just get those deterministically without having to rely on RNG. So, already we have covered many features, but as it turns out, we are very much still not done. The main thrust of this patch so far has been finding the bastards who caused all those void invasions and going to where they live and killing them. And with that done, it seems we're now mostly clear of at least the initial void threat of this expansion. And what that means is we can now focus on the future. So patch 12.1 seems to be taking us to that mysterious island off the coast of Zalaman, and this patch brings us a new campaign called Legacy of the Amani, where we basically quest with Zul'Jan and his uncle. And by the end of that, we'll be ready for 12.1, though just to set your expectations, this questline won't be there on launch day. It's currently set to drop 4 weeks after the patch launches, which to some could feel like really egregious time gating. If it's done right, this could work quite well as a prologue for patch 12.1, and maybe Blizzard are timing this so that it drops after that patch is fully unveiled. Anyway, that is what we could call the required reading, right? The direct prologue. But we're also getting a new Lorewalking campaign with Lili Stormstout that walks us through the lore of the Xantalari, Drakari, Gurabashi, and Darkspear trolls. But as if that wasn't enough troll stuff, there's also Jinali's new Clutch, which is a short little questline over in Zalaman where the Loa of Fire comes back to hatch a fresh brood, and basically you help to run the ceremony for that, and in return you get a Jinali pet. So, that's all the main bits of content, right? But as it turns out, there is actually still quite a bit more coming. We've got major changes to the UI and a bunch of system stuff as well. I'll start this off with Turbulent Timeways, which is coming back and starts on the 1st of July. But it's actually got a huge quality of life improvement over its past versions, and that is that the XP buff is now account-wide, and it still stacks up to a maximum of 30% bonus XP. They've also added Dragonflight to the Timewalking rotation, and the weekly quest is upgraded to drop hero track gear, and also there's a new Veranoth mount that you can get from this that is actually easier to get than the previous Turbulent Timeway events, where the overall participation requirement is down from 5 weeks to 4. And with that mount dropping, it does mean that the only Primal Incarnate mount left will be the one themed after Iridikron, but I wouldn't expect him to be back until the Last Titan. Okay, so that's going to be huge for leveling, but it's only an event. There's another way, though, where leveling is really changing. Vastly so, actually. So here's what Blizzard have done. The weekly quests, delve quests, and prey quests now drop vastly more experience. And what that means is that you can now level from 80 to 90 far faster and very much without having to regrind the same old quests. Honestly, I think 80 to 90 in under 2 hours will be fairly doable for most people when you sum up all of those changes, and especially if you're managing to do that whenever Timeways is up. Okay, we're now almost done, but there's still a few more things coming. On the UI front, we're getting some pretty nice changes, and the big one is the personal resource display. It was first added in Legion, and then Blizzard kinda just forgot about it for, well, I guess a decade. But now it has finally been overhauled and it's way better. You can show or hide the power bars, you can edit the size and the shape of them, as well as the visibility rules. Class resources can be shown or hidden, there's a class color option for your health bar, and a bunch of other little tweaks as well. So I think it can now be a proper part of your UI if that's what you want. The next thing then is the DPS meter, which is getting a bunch of quality of life changes, and in small but huge news, you can finally set the boss timeline text to be either on the left or the right. Sounds like a small change, but in terms of UI cleanliness and options, it's really quite big. There's some other nice things as well, like battlegrounds are getting upgraded map icons, and there's a nice quality of life change to how target marker macros can work. Then there's holiday events. So Midsummer kicks off June 21st, there's going to be new festival flames to do, and this gorgeous looking Sun Festival's painted rock mount. And then there's the Darkspear Dash, which is Blizzard's official version of the Running of the Trolls community event. And guess what? I might almost be out of breath, but there's actually one or two more things. So we're getting some quality of life changes with the abundance feature, where you can now stack multiple dum-dums at once. What a oddly named feature. And then finally, a small host of housing upgrades. There's 100 new decor items that have been added to the existing vendors. The exterior decor limits are now up to 300 and 350 for housing levels 5 and 7 respectively. And finally, outdoor lighting is a thing. So, that's a lot, especially for a minor patch, and I'd say that if this patch is able to avoid the bugginess of 12.05, it'll be a banger. But obviously, that's a fairly major if. Now, there is one thing I need to mention that appeared in the data mining, though, and that is a Thrall Lorewalking campaign, and one that seems pretty cool. It appears to follow his entire journey from the likes of, say, Durnhold and the internment camps all the way through to like Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft, and I'd say the implication is really quite obvious. He is almost certainly going to be a key character, maybe in 12.1, maybe in 12.2, but I would say certainly for the Last Titan. I mean, just think about the World Soul Saga cinematic. It was Thrall, Anduin, and the Sword. So more of this stuff for Thrall makes a hell of a lot of sense. And while the Sword hasn't done anything itself in Midnight, a hell of a lot has went down that is related to the Sword's owner, Sargeras. So if you want to learn what's really going on with Sargeras, all the demons, the Burning Legion stuff, and how it ties into the Last Titan, good news! You can check out this video next.